I thought I'd start with a story. About 5 years ago, a mate and I were sort of musing on this sort of idea that people are our most important asset. Now, if that was really true in business, how come the CEO doesn't spend 60% of his week with the HR director? And actually spends most of his time with the FD, right, or the CFO. So that tells you what's really important. So there is this sort of challenge, like how do you get the sponsorship thing? So we're going to come to that. So we thought, well, actually, we have a view about what CEOs should be paying attention to. So we did this sort of bit of research, went around the world and spoke to 500 of the world's top CEOs. So the sort of Michael Dells of this world, Joe Chen in China, Richard Branson and Martin Sorrell, Lord Brown, and all of that. And basically, we went up and asked them what they were thinking about. So we basically sort of cribbed their answer sheet. So, Martin Sorrell, what are you thinking about? Richard Branson, what have you got on your... And we went in with a view about what they should be thinking about and sort of tested that sort of Stephen Fry, on QI, where he's already got the answer and he tries to provoke the panel into coming up with what he'd already thought of. So we did that sort of maneuver, and actually we found that not one of those 500 guys was thinking about anything we hadn't thought of. So that was quite interesting. And most of them were only thinking about one thing. Now, it's not the thing you think it is. That was a different bit of research. Well, at least what they told us. But most of them were thinking simply about the commercial performance of their business, the numbers, the day-to-day quarterly battle, because that's what they get hired for, that's what they get fired for. So that sort of 80 to 95% of their time was obsessed about the quarterly numbers. So they never really got out the weeds of that. Occasionally, some of the better ones didn't just think about that. So if you imagine a sort of classic sort of four-box model, top left is commercial performance, the quarterly numbers. Top right is the future. So some of them thought about how do we build the future as well. So all the classic stuff, vision, purpose, vision, mission, governance, strategy, ambition, all of those sort of things. So some of them thought about that. We're going to build the future. So we can't just drive the numbers out today. We've got to think about how we drive the numbers out 3 years from now. And then after that, very few of them thought about anything other than those two things. So bottom right in the four-box model is culture, interpersonal stuff, relationships. And bottom left, which virtually none of them ever spent any time, was personal. So the way to remember it is there's basically three dimensions. I, bottom left, we, bottom right, and it, which are the top two quadrants. It comes in a short-term version, top left, and a longer-term version, top right. So I, we, it. So those are the only things anybody needs to think about, because they're the three dimensions of our life. They exist in every single moment of our life. So as we're talking now, those three dimensions exist right now in this moment. So we are relating to each other. There's some interpersonal dynamic happening. As we're relating to each other, you're having interior thoughts and feelings. That's the I piece. So this guy's talking rubbish, or whatever it is. So there's an internal phenomena, and we're doing something. We're sitting in chairs, looking at a screen type thing. So even in this moment, there's an I, a we, and an it. So these three dimensions exist in every single moment of your life. The trouble with most execs is their whole world's collapsed. They've become one-dimensional, become human doings. The only thing that matters is doing something, right? Long to-do lists, tick it off, task, action, goal orientation, and so on. And the doing tends to be predominantly short-term. So one of the reasons culture is difficult is a lot of them aren't actually paying attention. So if you imagine a visual where it's actually, you could put the four quadrants out in front of you on the floor, the two forward quadrants are it. What have we got to do? What do we do? Mainly sort of, I'm not even looking that way, I'm just looking that way, the short-term doing. So I'm kind of like wandering around with a patch on my eye, just looking at the commercial performance, right? The interpersonal, the culture, the we stuff is over the right shoulder, the personal is over the left shoulder. I'm not even looking at it. So that's one of the reasons it's difficult. I'm not even thinking about that most of the time. So you can come in and, oh yeah, culture, Peter Drucker's, culture eats strategy for breakfast and all of that. Sort of theoretically get, yeah, but I've got to do stuff, right? So we've collapsed into one dimension. A lot of business people have collapsed into one dimension, the world of doing. So it's quite a task to open people up to those, three dimensions of their life. And even when you start talking to them, like, do you think actually it matters, So you've got all these things to do. If you turn up really grumpy, how well are you going to do what you need to do? If you turn up sort of really excited and energized, you're going to do it differently, aren't you? Yeah. So even when you point this out to them, right, that sort of lasts about a nanosecond in their mind, and meanwhile back to the doing, right? So we've got to wrestle to open people up. We're multi-dimensional. I, we, it, 3 dimensions. And there's a 4th dimension, which is the sophistication we bring to any one of those 3. So I like to sort of use this metaphor. If you imagine the dimension of it, we've built the sort of Khalifa towers to task goal, targets and stuff, right, in front of us. There's this huge kind of construction of strategy and whatever. And then over the left shoulder is a concrete car park, and over the right shoulder is a small pop-up tent. So there's just nothing, there's no altitude, there's no sophistication in these areas, or insufficient sophistication. It's all about the doing. There's an obsession about the doing, right? So that's the challenge. We've got to open them up to the other dimensions. So 4 quadrants. So culture really relates to everything. Culture is in that we space, and it relates to the doing, which is why you change culture. You can totally change the capability to deliver the strategy. But it also is built on the I stuff, because it's human beings that ultimately create the culture. The culture doesn't come out of machinery, right? It comes out of the people, right? So, but having a model, having a sort of 4-quadrant model helps you know where you are. So you can look at your own diary on a weekly basis and think, well, how much time do I spend on the sort of the performance of HR? All the stuff that I need to do to make HR work. What's the commercial performance of HR? Right? How much time do I spend in my diary looking at building a future HR? What HR is going to look like in this business 5 years from now? How much time do I spend where I just have a meeting purely about relationships and about culture within HR, within how much time do I actually spend on that? And how much time do I spend thinking about the way that I show up and the energy I bring? So if you only look at your own diary, you might discover, bit of a shock horror, that you've got sucked into the same, day-to-day weeds as the rest of the business, right? So it's a challenge for you. So if you're going to try and open these leaders up to the fact that there's 3 dimensions and we've got to build the sophistication, the 4th dimension in each of those 3, right? That's quite a task. So just have a little think about that as you go away. There are 3 dimensions we have to pay attention to be brilliant leaders. And most leaders aren't leaders. Most leaders are managers of the commercial performance. They're not actually even leading. They're managers. So we found 80 to 95% of all those world-class CEOs, top left, and that was all. Right? So it's quite a challenge. And the other reason I think culture is quite a challenge is it's confusing. So we hear all the time about people being confused about the different phenomena within culture. And we've already seen on the sort of, was it 4 million hits or something on? 4 million. Yeah. It's confusing, right? 1.4, thank you. It's confusing, right? And so it's very difficult to move forward if you haven't got the concepts forensically differentiated in your mind. Oh, well, this is that and that is, like in medical terms, if you don't know your backside from your elbow, it's difficult to treat a patient, right? So in culture terms, if you can't tell the difference between a value and a belief, it's difficult to move forward, right? So I just want to show you, this is the most technical slide, you don't have to read this, just to give you a sense of values. If you walk the floor, you can get a feel for the values. It's sort of more of a feeling thing. So if you think the basic building blocks, thoughts and feelings inside of us, so values and beliefs are combinations, if you like, of thoughts and feelings. But the values bit is more of a feeling and the belief is more of a thought. So I think of it like this, a sort of tennis ball or a yin-yang sort of a thing where the values is predominantly the sort of grit in the oyster is the feeling, right, defined, right? So if you want to sense what the values already are, you can sort of walk the floor and you get a feel for what the values are. Is this a happy culture? Is this an entrepreneurial culture? You can feel it, right? So it's more in the feeling dimension, whereas a belief is more in the thought dimension, right? And what makes a belief powerful or not is the amount of emotional charge. So values and beliefs are combos of thoughts and feelings. Does that make sense? It's like a tennis ball. So the reason culture is difficult is if you look at attitudes are collections of values and beliefs. So it's like a whole bunch of tennis balls together. And culture, as it manifests in all these different things, is kind of driven by a whole constellation of attitudes. So it gets more and more complicated. So culture is a pretty complicated thing, right? And part of the problem we're in is we use all these words interchangeably, you know, values and beliefs and culture, and then there are all these other things. There's other stuff like climate, you know, and that's how the culture is currently presenting. And then there's sort of character or personality, which is really the sort of dominant ones, the sort of red, yellow tennis balls, the dominant features. So if you use all these words, you know, some people I've heard even use the word behavior. Oh yeah, well, culture is sort of behavior, isn't it? No, it's not. It's behavior is behavior and culture is culture, right? Yeah, but that's sort of values, isn't it? No, you know. You know, they are different phenomena, identity, reputation. So part of the struggle with culture is we're confused about all these things. So how can we move forward if we're confused about them, right? So we've got to get much more forensically, we're trying to shift the values, or we're trying to shift the beliefs, or we're trying to shift the climate, or try and understand the personality or the character. So there's a whole piece there. If we're trying to help organisations move forward and we ourselves are unclear, it's much harder. I mean, it's hard enough as it is because they're in the doing, right? But if we haven't got that sort of forensic clarity, so there's another point. So we've got to get, in my view, really clear about that. Does that make sense? So to come back to the, I think, just go back to the previous slide, which is, okay, so culture exists. It always strikes me as very funny where we start to design a culture, right? As though we're on a blank sheet of paper, right? It's already there, right? Or even worse, like we heard already, like the exec board's going to come up with the 6 values and impose it. I mean, how amazing. I mean, my most amusing example of that was one of the big banks in the city did exactly that maneuver, which is profoundly misguided. And they came up with their list of 6, and it's always the same list, isn't it? All these come with respect, integrity, honesty, you know, always the same list, right? Never true. And they came up with this list, and this was the thing, and they were so proud of this list, they decided to chisel it into the wall of reception. And one of the values was flexibility, which the irony was completely lost on them. The guy's literally standing there, chiseling in the word flexibility in the wall of the reception. We're a flexible culture. I mean, it's unbelievable. And it stems from this confusion, right? You can't impose a set of values, right? The values are already there, right? So ask, find out what already goes on, right, in the system. And the best way to find out, ask the most junior person, right? They'll tell you. You actually walk the floor, you can feel it usually. So what you usually see in this sort of list, this sort of poster of the usual suspects, is all aspirational, you know. And it's okay to have an aspiration, but it's not what's true. So most organisations haven't even got the maturity to admit where they really are. So if you're not admitting, and partly because they don't actually know. Well, if you don't know where you are, you're lost, right? And if you don't admit the truth to yourself, how can you possibly evolve, right? So our task, I think, is to really find out, well, where are we? You know, where is the culture? What currently exists in the system? Where are we right now? And where are we trying to get to? Right? Culture exists, so our job is to understand what level of sophistication the culture operates at and how do we guide it to the next level. So there's another point that comes out there in terms of understanding the culture, which is, you know, people sort of describe the culture in a kind of flat land. It's all preference and there's 1,000 different versions of. But if you look at the academic research, that's not actually true. There are about 8 different you know, cultures that come from different value systems. There are 8 different value systems in the world, and one evolves from another. It's an evolutionary model. So a lot of the problems you see in organisations, but in nations and in the world generally, are culture wars, right? So a lot of the tensions you see in executive teams are not down to personality. Oh, it's a personality clash. It's virtually never a personality clash. It's usually a values clash, right? They come from different value sets. So this thing about, oh, this, you know, we've got to have the evidence for the chief executive, right? Well, evidence will work if they operated a value system that values evidence. Some don't, right? Some operate from a completely different value set, so giving them evidence won't make any difference to them, right? So I'll give you an example. I was working with the exec board of TNT, and they were trying to get a client off DHL. There was this huge, massive sort of IT security company in Australia, and they were trying to get that business. And they tried everything. They brought evidence of how much of this was cheaper, and they brought, you know, all sorts of commercial manoeuvres, buy one, get one free, free choose, all sorts of marketing manoeuvres and promotions to try and entice the client across. None of it worked, and they were completely baffled by this. They couldn't understand. They were showing our USP and the differentiation is this and da-da-da-da. And the client was no, 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 no. Right? And they were just dumbstruck. They had no idea how to convert the client. And it's because they were appealing to the wrong value set. Right? So when we discussed the client that they were trying to win across, the IT security. So what they valued, what mattered to them was no change. Because they don't take any risks. Right? They want stability. Right? And they wanted to make sure their stuff got where it needed to get to. So I said, your strategy is completely wrong. You're going in, right, saying how much cheaper you are and all the commercial things. It matters not two hoots to them. And you're telling them how different you are. I go in the total opposite strategy. It's like, what? So we'll go in and tell them how similar you are, right? So, you know, DHL turn up on a Tuesday, we turn up on a Tuesday, right? Their bloke's called Doug, our bloke's called Doug, right? We're virtually the same company. You could bet. They've got 2 vans, we got 2 vans. You go in there, says you can't tell the difference. We're even wearing the same coloured tee. We're orange, they're faded orange. They call it yellow. We're the same. You wouldn't even notice. You won't notice any difference switching to. Well, there is one difference. We can guarantee the delivery for these reasons, and they can't. Right? That's the only real difference between us. But other than that, you wouldn't even see a difference. Now that guarantee was the security appeal. When they played that strategy, the client changed instantly. So what was driving that was their value set. So there are 8 value sets if you look at the research, and each one emerges from the next. So in terms of where is the culture right now, and some of these words we come up with, right, you know, you'll get words that cluster in each of these value sets. Right, so some words resonate more with one value set and not another. So part of getting the resistors, you know, how do you get the resistors on board? So I've got 2 things, which is if you don't understand which value set they're coming from, you'll probably fail, right? So you have to language it in the value set of the recipient, not your value set. So TNT, in their value, will language it in commercial, pragmatic, straight talking. Well, that was their value set, but it wasn't the client or the customer's value set.
How do you figure out what value set they're focusing on?
So we can measure it and tell you, or you can read the literature and understand how these levels evolve. So either, you know, you get into the best model. So there's basically sort of 3 academic researchers, Hofstadter, who you may have heard of, Schwartz, and Claire Graves. Right? So Graves is probably, in our view, the best of them because his model is more evolutionary. Some of these other people have like a flat model, you know, where everything is equal. Well, actually, that's not really how it is. It's evolutionary. It's a vertical model, not a flat model. It's not just, well, there's this type and this type and this type and this type, right? This isn't a typology, it's a vertical evolutionary model. So if you understand that, so you read the model, you can just hear it in their language. Once you understand the model, you can hear the words that they use and what they give significance to, right? Or you can actually measure it. So we do a lot of work, we just measure it and say, well, here's where you are, right? And what's important is you're operating at this level and here's the next level. So here's how we get you from this level to that level. But talking to the audience, you've got to appeal to, you know, if the audience is a monoculture, you've got to speak in the language of the audience, not in your language, right? If it's sort of lots of different types of value sets in the room, you've got to say something to every single value set in order to get the message to land, right? So, so that's one thing, is actually in working with the non-believers and taking them on a journey. Look, here's where the culture really is right now, and here's what where we're trying to get it to. Right? So one bit is understand the value systems that people are operating from. The other bit I wanted to just share with you was this thing about perspective taking. Right? So
yeah. You use the phrase value set,
yeah.
And I'm confused as to whether you're equating a value set with the word culture. And I know you're very clear that we need to be clear about the differences.
Yeah.
So is a value set a culture?
No.
In your
No. Remember, good question, right? So if you think the values, right, which is this bit here, is part of every single attitude, and it's the constellation, right? So there'll be a set of values that tend to cluster. So purples will tend to cluster, right? So there'll be a set of values. So for example, what people value might be money, the profit thing, right? Now some companies, charities less so perhaps, but some companies, it's all about the money. So go to private equity houses, nothing else really matters, right? What's the can we return the money to our own pockets and to the shareholders' pockets? That's all that counts. Nothing else has much value, right? So there's lots of ways that shows up, right? Which then significantly influences the entire culture. So imagine red is the values that hinge around money and materialism. Every kind of half that tennis ball is red, right? So it's not just the money. I mean, there are beliefs that exist in that system and there are attitudes and so on. But there's this huge constellation around one phenomena, materialism. Does that make sense? So it's not the same thing, it's sort of complex. So if you're trying to shift people, you've got to appeal to the value set. Now, if you don't understand about value sets, you're sort of stumbling around in the dark, hoping you're going to say stuff that really works. The other way to do it is to understand the anatomy of relationships, because all of this sort of moving people forward requires you to relate to them. That's in the we space. It's not a doing, it's an interpersonal we relating thing. And the anatomy of relationships operates off three perspectives. So I'm going to just share this with you, but I want you to take this away and experiment with it in your own life, because this is hysterical once you realize, right? So there's basically all human beings operate usually either from what's called the first person perspective or the third person perspective. First person is me, my I, right? Well, in my view, right, and in my experience, right, and in all my years in business, so you'll hear people extol this, it's first person. And there's a lot of passion, there's a lot of emotion. So if you find yourself compelled to speak at any point in any meeting, you're in the first person usually, because something's triggered an emotion in you and you feel a compulsion to say, you're wrong, right? So that's first person, right? Powerful passion, advocacy. Often when you get that emotion rising up, it's got you. You're subject to the emotion. You haven't got it, it's got you, right? So it's subjective, right? You're subject to it. So you'll see people in meetings go, oh, wow, you're doing all of that, the passionate advocacy. Now, if you haven't seen people in that space, or you don't recognize it yourself, then you're probably in the third person, which is the rational observer, the objectivity. So the helicopter above, well, if we look at the evidence, right, and the data suggests, if we look at the numbers, so the helicopter above, so people take first or third, right? But the magic of relationship really exists in second, right? So go into any bar and you will see people literally transmitting, broadcasting at each other from the first person perspective, right? So this is when it gets funny. So somebody's in a bar chatting and there's virtually no relationship happening. There's virtually nothing, there's no point of contact. Maybe just one word jumps the gap between these two people, right? So you'll see these people sort of having a chat. Oh, what did you do at the weekend? No, I took my dog for the walk. You've got a dog? I've got a dog. Let me tell you about my dog. And then they tell you the same story you just told them. Have you ever said that? It's like, that's the story I told you just now. And it's hysterical. When you're watching this, there's just literally one word. Oh yeah, I took my dog for a walk down the canal. We've got a canal near us. And then they start on their canal. Right, they're both in the first person. So what happens when you get into conflict, right? Somebody's trying to impose their first person view on somebody else, right? So the chief executive is absolutely convinced they're right, right? And their whole goal is to win the argument and impose their view. Because if I can impose my view, it's easy, everybody follows me, and it's simple, right? But human beings don't like to be imposed on, right? So they're looking for ways to fight that battle. So you'll see first-person broadcasts or third-person arguments. I'll see your bit of evidence and I'll trump it with this bit of evidence. So that goes on as well, first and third-person battles. And in the first and third person, we're trying to win, right? So it's really a win-lose mentality. I'm trying to beat your argument with my argument. But where relationship really, the magic of relationship exists in the second-person perspective. So I'll give you a classic example. Imagine a guy comes home from work, like really kind of pissed off about something, right? Yeah, there we go. Jim, little clue there, Jim. Something's happened, right?
Tell me that.
So I spoke to your wife last night. Something's happened, right? And you wouldn't believe what's happened today. First person, right? And so the partner says, well, just resign then. That's helpful, isn't it? Yeah, but you don't understand. And she's thinking, well, you don't understand, because actually we had this conversation last week. So they're both, you recognise this? So there's this impasse, right? You start to think, oh my God, I've married an idiot. Right? Recognise it? I've married an idiot. Because they're not listening to me. And they both think that about the other person. This marriage is on the rocks. Now, none of that is true. We're just stuck, right? And the irony of that is, because we don't understand the anatomy of relationship, we actually both want the same thing, right? So the person that's upset wants the other person to share their upset. The person with the answer wants the other person to share their answer. So they actually both want something shared. That's second person. Second person perspective taking is the common ground, is the shared perspective. But we can't see that. So we just stay stuck in our hurt or stuck with our answer. And we try to impose it, right? And get them to where we are. And that's why relationships stall. I mean, literally, you'll see it goes round and round in a circle for hours and hours. Well, if you watch this in a meeting, again, this is hysterical. Once you realise this is happening, it's what I call a popcorn meeting, right? So somebody fires off a first-person perspective. The rest of the room ignore that one, right? And somebody fires off a completely unrelated perspective. The rest of the room ignores that, and a third pop, 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 pop. You've seen that, right? It's popcorn, isn't it? You think, no, we're not getting anywhere. We're going round in circles. We're just wasting time and money, right? Nobody takes second. Second looks like somebody going, well, hang on a minute. So if I get what Jim's saying and what Porter's saying and what Katie said, well, what seems to be emerging is that's second. That's trying to create the common ground, right? From a platform from which we can build forward. That is incredibly rare. Right? So the best facilitators do that. You have to empty yourself. You can't come with a view. You empty yourself and just facilitate what's in the room. So as soon as you think, well, even as you'll see this with facilitators suddenly get triggered. They go into the first person, you're wrong about that, and then they come in and, well, actually, no, you're meant to have a view. You're meant to be facilitating other people, right? And so it gets in a bit of a mess. So taking people forward in a cultural transformation, if you can understand the anatomy of these dynamics, that there is a first person, a second person, and a third person perspective. And the reason it's difficult getting into second person perspective taking, right, is you have to set aside first and third to get into second. Now, if you're in first with a powerful belief about this, that, or the other, I can't set that aside because it feels like you're setting aside yourself, right? It feels like you're sort of denying yourself, right? And there's a loss of authenticity or something. Well, no, we're not saying you deny what your beliefs are and not what you really feel. We're just saying, look, park that for a moment, right? Just stop being completely overwhelmed by your brilliant belief about the world. Just park it for a second and see if you can find what's common. And that's difficult for people to do because they feel like they're giving themselves up. And of course, people in third-person perspective feel like they're giving up the truth, right? And the evidence, the facts and reality. Well, I can't give that up. You're asking me to ignore reality? So I can't get into second either. So do you see how people get stuck? Can't give up myself, can't give up reality, so I just stay stuck in third or first. And we never find the magic of second. Now, the best leaders and the best HR people can move effortlessly in and out of first. You can go with, none of these are good or bad, right? It's just understanding. So I can enter into first, give some passionate advocacy, but not be attached to that view. It's just a view after all, right? Then I can step out of first and go, what's going on here? Right? I can take an observer, then I can step into the observer and make some commentary about what's happening. That's third, right? So I can step into first or third, or I can come into second, which is completely forget what I believe about the world, and my observations about the world, and just work with what's present, right? That's the second person shared perspective. Now, if you can enter and exit first, second, and third, that's fourth. That's the ability to take a perspective on your perspective. You got that? That's clever, isn't it? If you've got sufficient self-regulation where you can even witness your own perspective taking while it's happening, that's really skillful, right? So in taking people forward, the ability to take a perspective on a perspective is incredibly powerful, right? Your ability to transform anything is when you've got the freedom to step into first, passionate advocacy, step out of it, step into some observational data, step out of it, step into the facilitation space. If you can do all three of those maneuvers on demand at will, you are mega sophisticated, right? That's fourth person. There are 8, by the way. I won't bore you with the rest. There are 8 levels of perspective, but this is fourth, right?
Have you met many of them?
There are virtually no leaders able to go up to 8. Virtually none.
What about the fourth?
Very unusual, right? Most stuck in first or third, right? And actually, if you think, well, actually, you might think of yourself, I tend to resonate in either first or third. Now, most people who can do first and third actually switch between. So you'll find that people, when the evidence isn't working, when they've presented the data and people aren't buying it, they get annoyed. That's first, right? So they switch from the evidence maneuver to the passion maneuver or the bullying thing, right? Or you might have the person bullying and the bullying or the passion isn't working and people aren't buying it. They drop first and they look for some evidence to prove that you're wrong. So that's going from first to third. So most people play first and third, right? They have a orientation, tend to either stay first and then occasionally do third, or either stay third and occasionally do third. But most people can do first and third. Very few people can do second. But the ability to do first, second, and third, in and out, fourth, massively powerful. So in the evolution of culture, so these sort of group dynamics, you're seeing 2 primary fundamental things that are driving it, which is which of the 8 value sets are we coming from, and do we understand the anatomy of relationship? Now, if you understand just those 2 bits, it is totally going to transform your ability to move people forward. Is that, how long are we doing for time? Yeah.
Nearly there.
Right. Okay. So getting stuck into those 2 things, I really encourage you, just in your conversations, so if you take away today, just start to witness yourself, right? So which one am I in, right? Watch other people having conversations, which one are they in, right? So we'll often do an exercise just to prove how difficult it is for people. So this is a really fun exercise you can do, is get 2 execs and say, okay, I want you to take the cost perspective, right? It's all about cost. We've got to keep the money down. And you're going to take, the customer perspective, and we want value and quality and, all that, right? Now have a debate. You try and convince her she's wrong. You try and convince him he's wrong, right? Set them off. And they go at it hammer and tongs, and no progress is really made, right? Because it's an either-or arm wrestle, right? And then if you put somebody to observe and then somebody to facilitate, right? Now the facilitator sits, watches you, kind of like, very difficult, trying to reconcile. So usually the person you put in the second person to try and facilitate goes into third. Guys, you're just talking at each other. So they make an observation, right, from third person. And the guy who's in third person, the person is making notes, and they're just talking at each other. Well, hang on, they've suddenly stole my ground. I was the observer. So then that pisses them off, right? And they flip into first. No, hang on, no, I'm doing that bit. So the person in third flips into first. So you've got the 2 protagonists get stuck in first, the facilitator flips out into the third, and the person in the observer flips into first. Not one of the 4 people takes second. Does that make sense? So just watch it happen. It's unbelievably funny once you realize it's happening. It's like suddenly seeing the dynamics of human relationships happen live. And also do the experiment yourself. So try and move forward from where people are at. And the best way to do this is what you're doing is you're hunting for what we can agree on. Now sometimes it's a detail, sometimes it's a big picture. So you go up and down the scale of things to try and find, well, what is it we're agreed on? So if you're facilitating a conversation in the NHS, for example, you might say, well, look, we're arguing about this, that, and the other, but can we at least all agree that the NHS should still be free at the point of delivery? That's like the higher purpose of the NHS. Well, yeah, we're all agreed on that. Right. Great, we've banked it. We've banked some common ground. Right, and then what you do is you go down and down into the detail until you discover, it's like a zip, right? You're looking for where, at the higher purpose we're connected, then we're going down into the detail to find out where it's unraveled. right? So, or you can come from the bottom and work up. So if you remember relationships, so if you look at the scale of things, relationships, again, if you think about your own relationships, at the most basic level, physical, sometimes we had bad relationships in our life, it worked fantastically. The sex was great. There was a real physical connection. But emotionally, you know, we don't, they were labile and we weren't, or we were labile and they weren't, or there was emotional disconnection, right? So there was a physical connection, but it unravels at the next level up. Or maybe there's good physical connection. Emotionally, we're very compatible, but intellectually, you know, I'm way smarter than that person. So the trouble with smart women, finding a date on a Saturday night is difficult, no. But, you know, so we've got the physical bit, we've got the emotional bit, but the intellectual bit. Or you might find actually the intellectual, so Jeffrey Archer, the intellectual connection's strong, but it's unraveled at the physical, right? So all relationships, you know, there's sort of levels of hierarchical sophistication, right? So we might be connected emotionally and physically, but intellectually misconnected or disconnected. But you've got to find the common ground. So if you're connected intellectually, find out whether is it unconnected or is it unraveled lower down or higher up. So that's in working with this sort of dynamic is you've got to find the common ground and keep calling it out. The tendency when you're working with groups is even when they've agreed something or aligned on something, they're so action orientated. Oh yeah, it's another thing, and another thing, and another thing. They're on to something else, right? Whoa, no, stop. Guys, I think we've just agreed something. So can we all write this down because we've agreed it, right? And people are, oh yeah, on to the next thing. It's so important because that's the foundation stones from which you're going to build forward. What are we agreed on? What are we aligned on, right? So start there. So that's perspective taking. Now, if you know and understand how values empower culture, and there's evolution in those values, and you understand what the levels are and how to move from one level to the next, and you understand the anatomy of relationships, as two assets in your sort of armory, you know, you could probably transform an awful lot of stuff just with those two assets. So that's probably enough. How am I doing for time?